Welcome back to Horrors Worldwide. Today I'm going to explain a supernatural psychological horror film called Hereditary, released in 2018. Spoilers ahead! Watch out and stay safe. The movie begins with a funeral notice that Ellen Taper Leigh has died at the age of 78 in her daughter Annie's house. The scene then changes to show a miniature house and zooms into one of the rooms, where Steve Graham wakes his teenage son Peter for his grandmother's funeral. He also wakes up his 13-year-old daughter, Charlie, who he finds sleeping in the treehouse. Annie, Steve's wife, then delivers her mother's eulogy, during which she explains her stubborn nature and how she was a difficult woman to read. Her daughter, Charlie, clicks her tongue during the service and is seen drawing a strange sketch in her notebook. Annie, being an artist who sculpts miniature dioramas, is seen sculpting miniature figurines that night. She goes into Charlie's room, where Charlie wonders aloud that her grandmother wanted her to be a boy. Annie tells Charlie that she was her grandmother's favorite. When Annie leaves the room, she finds a note from her mother in a box of her belongings with a strange symbol on it. After reading the note, Annie looks up to see a haunting vision of her mother, but shakes it off, thinking she's imagining it. The next morning, Charlie is at school when a pigeon flies into the class's window and dies. Charlie takes a pair of scissors from her class and cuts off the dead pigeon's head. When she looks up, she sees a woman across the street who smiles and waves at her. The scene changes and Steve receives a call from the cemetery. He is told that Ellen's grave has been desecrated, which he hides from Annie. Annie tells Steve that she's going to a movie but actually goes to a support group for the loss of loved ones. There, Annie openly discloses how difficult her mother's life was, as Annie's brother had suicided and her father had starved himself to death. She also mentions that her mother had dissociative identity disorder and dementia. The next day, Charlie is seen sitting in her room, making a toy using the pigeon's head she had cut off before. This is when she sees a strange light in her bedroom that guides her to the window. Meanwhile, Peter lies to Annie, telling her that he wants to go to a school barbecue, when in reality, he wants to go to a friend's party. Annie is skeptical that there may be drinking at the party and allows him to go only if he takes Charlie with him. Charlie, following the light, has gone outside the house where she sees a vision of her grandmother sitting, surrounded by fire. Annie finds Charlie standing barefoot outside of the house and breaks her out of the trance she's in. She then asks Charlie to go to the party with Peter, to which she reluctantly agrees. On the way to the party, a utility pole is seen with a strange symbol on it. When they reach the party, Peter wants to smoke marijuana with Bridget, a girl he likes, and her friends. So, to distract Charlie, he asks her to get herself a slice of chocolate cake, which has a large number of walnuts in it. Charlie, being terribly allergic to nuts, has an anaphylactic shock when she eats the cake. She comes to her brother wheezing, who then puts her in the car and drives to the hospital. Charlie, struggling to breathe, puts her head out of the car. Peter, suddenly seeing an animal on the road, swerves the car, and Charlie violently hits her head on a utility pole on the side of the road, leading to her death. Peter is stunned and goes to bed without telling his parents. The next morning, Charlie's head is found on the side of the road, and Annie loses control crying, wanting to die. The family then holds a funeral for Charlie. The scene changes and Peter is seen smoking marijuana with his friends under the bleachers at his school. Suddenly, Peter has a panic attack and feels his throat closing up. Annie is then sitting in her car. She drives to the support group she went to last time, but changes her mind when she reaches there. While leaving, a woman appears in front of the car. She tells Annie that she was also in her support group and asks how she's doing. When Annie tells her that her daughter was killed, the woman comforts her by telling her that her son and grandson had both drowned. She then introduces herself as Joan and gives Annie her address in case she ever needs to talk. That night, Peter hears Charlie's clicking noise and thinks he sees his dead sister in his room, but realizes it's only his hoodie in the corner of the room. Annie goes to Joan's home the next day. She tells her that she sleepwalks and that once she had woken up to see that she had covered Peter, Charlie, and herself in paint thinner and was about to strike a match. From then, her relationship with her children had never been the same. Later that day, Steve walks into Annie's studio to see her creating a disturbing miniature diorama of Charlie's accident and asks her to come have dinner. At dinner, Annie bursts and blames Peter for Charlie's death. Peter responds saying that Charlie wouldn't have gone to the party in the first place if it wasn't for her. The next day, Annie runs into Joan at an art supply store. Joan, who was very excited, tells Annie about an open seance that had changed her skepticism about physics. She tells her that she had been able to hear the voice of her dead grandson. She then urges Annie to come to her house to witness a seance, to which Annie reluctantly agrees. At Joan's house, Joan makes contact with her grandson, who moves a glass and communicates with her using a chalkboard. Annie is shocked, but Joan comforts her and urges her to try conducting a seance to contact Charlie. She tells her to use an object that belonged to Charlie and gives her an incantation to recite. That night, Annie wakes up to see a trail of ants leading to Peter's room and sees Peter's dead body in his bed. She then wakes up from a sleepwalking trance and sees him sitting up in his bed with a confused look on his face. Peter asks Annie why she's so afraid of him. Annie involuntarily admits that she never wanted him anyway, and that she tried to have a miscarriage when she was pregnant with him. The two shout at each other before Annie wakes up to realize she was seeing a vision within a vision. Annie then gets up from bed and excitedly wakes Peter and Steve up to come with her to summon Charlie as Joan had suggested. When they conduct the seance, they are able to summon Charlie. Steve, shocked and reluctant to summon Charlie's spirit, argues with Annie when Charlie suddenly possesses her. Steve then throws water at Annie to break her out of the trance, and Peter cries in confused shock. In school, Peter sees the same strange light Charlie saw and looks sideways to see his reflection in a glass cupboard, which looks back at him with a smile. That night, Steve admonishes Annie for conducting the seance by telling her that Peter now thinks he is being threatened by a vengeful spirit.
Nothing. What happened?
Peter just called me, Annie. Terrified, crying in the halls, convinced he's being threatened by some vengeful spirit.
Why does he think he's being threatened?
Listen to me, Annie. I have a son to protect.
What does that mean?
It means that that's what I'm worried about right now, and that's how I'm...
Hey, don't talk to me like this. He's my son too.
Annie then goes to her studio and starts working. When she accidentally breaks a miniature chair, she ruins her entire studio out of frustration. Annie then goes to Charlie's bedroom to see her supernaturally drawing in her notebook. At the same time, Peter is woken up by Charlie's clicking sound and sees a vision of her. Her head rolls off onto the floor and turns into a ball before Peter gets choked in his bed. Annie walks into Peter's room just in time, and Peter blames Annie for choking him while sleepwalking. But Annie tells him that something supernatural is happening in their home and that she will take care of it. Annie realizes that the spirit she summoned is malevolent and decides to throw Charlie's notebook in the fireplace. When she does this, her arm catches on fire on its own, forcing her to retrieve the book. Annie then goes to Joan's home to ask her for help, but Joan does not respond when Annie knocks on her door. The camera then shows the inside of Joan's house, where her table is filled with candles and has a picture of Peter in the center of a triangle, scratched into the table along with a symbol Annie previously sees in family photos. Peter is at a table outside his school when he sees Joan standing across the street. She shouts,
"I expel you!"
from across the street, standing behind a fence. Annie goes through her mother's belongings to learn that her mother and Joan had known each other. She learns that the symbol she saw in her mother's note earlier was the symbol of the demon Paimon, one of the kings of hell. She also learns that her mother and Joan were in the same coven devoted to gaining riches by conjuring Paimon into a male body. Steve gets an email about the desecration of Ellen's grave, and the pictures show that Ellen's body is missing. Annie then goes to the attic to see Ellen's headless body on the floor with Paimon's symbol painted in blood on the wall behind her. The scene changes to show Peter in his classroom, who hears Charlie's clicking sound and suddenly enters into a disturbing trance. He hits his head on the table and breaks his nose. Steve receives a call from Peter's school and drives him home. When they reach, Annie is waiting for them outside the house and worries when she sees Peter passed out on the back seat. Together, they put Peter in his bed. Annie then tells Steve about what he saw in the attic. She also shows him the pictures of his mother and Joan wearing Paimon's symbol around their neck. She tells him that her family became cursed when she summoned Charlie, and that they need to get rid of the notebook for which she was willing to sacrifice herself. She tells Steve to throw the notebook in the fireplace, but Steve resists. Annie, desperate, takes the notebook from Steve and throws it in the fireplace, but this results in Steve combusting into flames instead of Annie. Peter wakes up and searches for his mom and dad. He sees his father's charred body on the floor, and in this moment, his possessed mother is seen in the background, hanging from the ceiling. Possessed, Annie then chases Peter, who runs into the attic and closes the door behind him. When he goes into the attic, undressed devil worshippers are seen in the background. Ellen's body has been removed, and in the place where her body was is a picture of Peter, with his eyes removed. Peter, disturbed, looks up to see his mother, hanging from the ceiling, stabbing herself in the neck. Peter, shocked at this frightening scene, jumps out of the window and passes out. Peter then wakes up and sees his mother's headless corpse floating into the treehouse. He follows the corpse inside the treehouse, where he sees an assembly of several people dropped in a prayer position, most of which are undressed devil worshippers. He sees a woman with long hair in a dress robe, his headless grandmother, and his headless mother, all bowing to his statue with Charlie's head on top of it. Peter looks at all of this with a dazed expression, and the long-haired woman, who happens to be Joan, calls Peter Charlie. She declares that he is the male host for Charlie's spirit, and declares the arrival of Paimon. The coven then hails Paimon, and the movie ends with a shot of a model treehouse with dolls that look like Peter, the headless Annie and Ellen, and the coven.